So in this second video we're going to be looking at some of the reasons why children come into foster care, and I've put some of the main reasons up here on the screen, and what you'll sadly notice about all of these reasons, the common denominator between all of them is that they are all negative. So it is never ever plan A for a child to be removed into foster care. Everybody recognises that the best place for a child to grow up is within their family, hopefully with their parents, or certainly with someone from their extended family, but sometimes that's not possible, and that might be where one or several of these things are going on. So domestic violence is a really common situation that we come across. About 60 or 70% of the cases we deal with will include domestic violence, and it might be that the children weren't necessarily involved being hurt physically, but often will have witnessed domestic violence between adults in their lives. Neglect and abuse are both also quite common. So neglect is the absence of care. So it might be children that are not being fed, their health needs have been ignored, they're not getting to school on time, babies kind of left in car seats with no one providing any stimulation for them. And then abuse can look like different things, so that could be sexual abuse, physical abuse, or emotional abuse. And some of these things are problems that parents might have, so things like mental ill health or substance misuse. And we're not saying that just because you have mental ill health doesn't mean that you can't look after your children well. When these things lead to a child coming into care, it's because it's like the adults' problems are kind of spilling over and impacting on the children to such an extent that they're at risk of significant harm, and their well-being is at significant risk. So at that point, a child would have to be taken out of that environment for a period of time to make sure that they are being kept safe and well. And there's a few different ways that can happen. So children sometimes come into care voluntarily, so parents will agree for a child to be looked after by the local authority. And that might happen, say a parent needs to go into hospital to have an operation and there's nobody else around in the UK that could look after that child, so the child might come into care just for a couple of weeks. Or perhaps a parent has got an alcohol or a drug addiction and they recognise right now they need to prioritise sorting that out, so maybe they need to go into rehab, and again there's nobody around to look after the child, so the child comes into care. But more often there is a lack of agreement between social workers and families about the right course of action for a child, and in that case social workers have to go to court and ask a judge to grant an order which then gives power for that child to be removed from their family and brought into the care system. And then finally, sometimes it happens in an emergency as well, so the police might get called to a home and see that things have kind of spiraled very badly out of control and a child needs to be removed in that instance to keep them safe. So the police have the power to remove children into what's called police protection for a very limited number of hours. So that's some of the main reasons why children come into care and the ways in which that can happen. Just worth touching on unaccompanied minors as well. So what I mean by that is young people, normally aged kind of 15, 16, 17, sometimes a bit younger, coming to the UK from abroad to seek asylum. So they might be coming from countries which are war-torn, or from places where maybe because of their political views or religious views or their sexual orientation they faced persecution and had to flee. And if they arrive in the UK without an appropriate adult to look after them, then they are accommodated in care until they reach adulthood. So for these young people, often they won't speak very much English, so foster carers need to work hard to overcome the language barrier, and Google Translate comes in very handy at this point. and they also have to help them get used to a very different culture and way of living, to settle into school and engage with their education, and also help them to kind of process the trauma that caused them to leave wherever they're from, and also often very traumatic journey coming to the UK. So those are some of the main reasons why children might come into care, and we see children from all of these kind of different situations in Camden, but I'm now just going to talk a little bit more specifically about the demographics of children in care in Camden. So if we start up here, as it says, a lot of our children in care are teenagers. 75% are over the age of 10. So we really, really need foster carers who are able to look after children in that older age bracket, so mostly secondary school aged children. We also need people that have got space in their homes for sibling groups. If we've had to remove children from their parents, the last thing we want to do is to separate them from their siblings as well. So if you've got a nice big house with lots of space and you can keep children together, then that's definitely an added bonus. And then finally, the unaccompanied minors that I was just speaking about. So we get a high proportion of unaccompanied minors in Camden, maybe because we're quite close to Dover. We've also got St Pancras with the Eurostar in our borough, so we have quite a lot of young people in the borough in that category. So at the moment we've got quite a lot of young people from some East African countries like Eritrea and Somalia, as well as from North Africa, the Middle East, Afghanistan, Albania, and a range of other places. So if you think you could take on the challenge of looking after a child with that language barrier as well, then we'd really love to hear from you. So in terms of what children and young people have experienced, all of them will have experienced the trauma of being separated from their families. And it's really important that we don't underestimate that. You might think, oh well, that's the right thing, now they're going to be safe. Yes, on the one hand that is true, but children often still have a very fierce sense of loyalty and belonging to their families, or perhaps don't even realise that the way that they were being treated was wrong, so they don't understand why they've been removed from their families. And then on top of that separation and loss, as we were just looking at in terms of reasons why children come into care, things like abuse and neglect, often they will have experienced other adverse experiences growing up as well. And all of that might leave them feeling confused or anxious or guilty. It might be that they said something to a teacher in school about daddy hitting them, or somebody saw some bruises, and then before they knew it, they were having to speak to the police, and then suddenly they find themselves being dropped off at this stranger's house and not really understanding what's happened or questioning whether they might have done something wrong. So you need to bear in mind where these children have come from when you're thinking about what they need and how to look after them. And children in foster care need all the same things that any child needs: love, affection, support, opportunities to have fun, but also things like stability and boundaries and routine and consistency are particularly important. For some of these kids, if they were neglected, it might be that there was no certainty that dinner was going to be provided each night. So to come into your home and know that there's that routine of every day at 6 o'clock we're going to sit down and we're all going to eat dinner together can really help them to feel safe, because they know what's going to be happening next, so they don't have to be scared or worried about where food is going to come from. Another thing that children still need is contact with their families, and we'll come on to talk more about that later, but it's just important to point out that in the majority of cases, even if children can't be living with their families, it will still be in their best interest to be seeing members of their families, and foster carers have a role to play in promoting that.